Next up, we have Daniel. Hi, Daniel. How's it going? How you doing today?
Hey, very good. Thanks. How are you doing? How's it been?
I'm doing wonderful. Yeah, very, very busy. Today, I think we're talking about RnDAO. Is that right?
Yeah, that's it.
I'm not very familiar with it. Can you tell me a little bit more about how the organization formed and who introduced yourself? And I'd love to hear more about your presentation.
Yeah, sure. Well, I have a background as a chef. Originally started my career there, and about 10 years ago, the last job I had in that industry was I was quite frustrated with the industry because I had joined because I got fascinated with molecular cuisine and it seemed like super creative and cool and scientific and culture and creativity and all that kind of stuff. And I joined the industry and it wasn't really like that. It was mostly a bunch of glorified assembly line workers. But I managed to find a way to join a research and development lab. That was this food group, like luxury food group that had an experimental kitchen. And they were doing products for the restaurants, products for supermarkets, TV shows, books, a bunch of different stuff. And actually the interesting thing was this R&D lab was making more money than any of the restaurants because they had managed to start a whole bunch of collaboration with academics, with like biologists and chemists and neuroscientists and psychologists and so on, do a lot of research together with them. And they had created very unique insights that didn't really exist in the industry. So then they were partnering with, say, a supermarket that wanted a funky product in there. They wanted like, okay, we're gonna do some, I don't know, some sort of tiramisu dessert, but we want it to be new and unique so people buy it. What can we do about it? And then we could apply this base of knowledge to that and come up with a new iteration of it based on all of these, let's say, out of the box influences that we're bringing that was no one else, or at least very few people were doing. Especially because it takes like a lot of time for like that deep cross pollination to happen. One thing is the quick ideas that you get, like you have a chat with someone from a different discipline for 5 minutes, you learn something, but it takes a while for you to start to understand how they think, and that's when the really interesting ideas come about. So in some shape or another, I've been trying to recreate this lab for the next 10 years, but not in the food industry, but outside of it. I became really interested in organization design and management and organizations and leadership and all of these sort of fields. And that's kind of what eventually took me to Web3 and so on. And so last year, I was at Aragon. I was head of governance there, and we had design and launch the DAO. And part of my role was advising the product team on organization design and trying to understand how DAOs work. And it's kind of like an impossible job because no one really knows, and it's really really complex. And you need all of these different perspectives to try to figure that out. And so I was essentially trying to reproduce this experimental kitchen pattern that I had seen, and trying to bring a collection of thinkers, of people from very diverse expertise across different institutions, across different organizations, that could help me think through this question of how should DAOs operate and how can we envision DAOs in the future. And then at the same time have the possibility, well, that we have in the experimental kitchen, if like, okay, you have an idea, I can take the ingredients, I can cook it, and half an hour later I can eat it and see if it tastes good or bad. And so trying to develop a little bit of a team that had the prototyping capabilities. But as I was kind of like going through that journey, what started to become very clear is that there were so many insights and ideas, like so many more than any single product team could take. And then the roadmap of the product team was like, okay, we're building a new product. It's going to take a very long time for that. So actually, a lot of the ideas we had, it was more like, yeah, maybe in a year from now. And that was kind of frustrating because also there were all these other things that I'm like, well, there is all these other DAOs out there, all these other DAO tooling projects out there that could use some of these ideas, but they don't really have the way to collaborate with us around it. And if I need to go and write an article, well, I'm a really slow writer. It takes me kind of like a couple of days full time, like a good 16 hours of deep work to write a decent piece. Or even if I bring a writer, it's an extra expense. And it's like, how do we justify that? And and so I started to think that actually in Web3, since it's a lot more collaborative, it would make a lot more sense to bring multiple DAOs to do research together, because so many of these DAOs were doing their own research, but they were not doing it very well. They had very limited resources. There was a lot of duplication of work, like multiple people researching the same thing over and over, like it had never been researched before, and it's not documented well. And if you just kind of like expanded the scope a little bit more, added a few more perspectives into it, look more into other influences, like organizations are very complex, and DAOs are very complex. There are so many different ways you can think about them, in a legal perspective, in a organization perspective, in a technology perspective, in the economic perspective, in a group psychology, community perspective, and so on. And if you ever don't think about one of these, it kind of comes back to bite you eventually. So it was like, can we it's kind of sort of stop solving the wrong problem really well if we can get more people to collaborate, and then we can really understand what it is that we are creating. And also through having that sort of shared vision, then these projects are going to be better at building it together, since we're talking about modularity and composability and these Lego building blocks and so on. That is this idea, instead of a single huge monolithic platform. So that was roughly how it came to be, and which is, I know, kind of like a long story, but fundamentally now it's become a research agency where we're working with different DAOs on doing research projects, trying to go very deep into whatever it is the topic that they're most interested in, then facilitating some strategy workshops with them, and then trying to get that collaborative knowledge to then, together with multiple DAOs, build those visions and so on. And then sometimes as those projects mature and there is an opportunity that is a little bit outside the scope of where let's say where a particular product team is, then we see whether we can assemble a team and together with them incubate the new tool or the new product that helps the ecosystem. So that's roughly the idea.
Awesome. Yeah, I think one of the key things with like a chef is you have an idea, you think of it, the flavors, and then the actual like execution window. You get to see the results much faster. There's not like a year between the idea, people wanting to do it, and the actual product. Um, I definitely think that stepping into the research part of it is critical. And as you say, the amount of duplicated effort is crazy. The amount like skills, bounties. We hear a lot of the same things, and a lot of great minds thinking on the same thing in different ways. And we also hear about like standards. And as we move towards standards of adoption, that like helps communicate these different breakthroughs that we have. Um, yeah. Do you have recommendations for how people can follow through with the research that you're building? How can they use it to support what they're doing already?
Yeah, so I mean, there's a few different ways. So one of the main influences that we have identified that is super rich and has a lot to offer DAOs is the world of self-management, or all of the experiments in progressive organization that have happened before. And we're hosting regularly different speakers that have experimented with, let's say, decentralized ways of organizing just before the decentralized technology, like before the blockchain was a thing, but they were already doing it at the social layer in different forms of shape. And we're hosting these speakers regularly. If you follow our Twitter, which is at RnDAO __, the talks are there, and we are also sharing the videos. So if you scroll through the feed, you'll find our previous videos you share on the YouTube channel, and that's interesting to as a sort of inspiration. Also, because then in like, to give you a snippet, in one of the recent projects that we did, we partnered together with Sobol, who's a Web3 tool for mapping DAOs for mapping roles and teams and circles and so on. So we partnered with them and did a research project on sub DAOs. And one of the main things was trying to understand the pain points that people have when they're trying to create, well, a sub DAO, or we call it more broadly speaking, a DAO units. Some people call it guilds or sub teams or pods or whatever, but is fundamentally fractionalizing a DAO, what they're going towards. And the number one pain point that just comes up in user interviews, and we did a bunch of them with, I think, 14 different DAOs, was leadership. But then when you start to look into it, people are saying, oh yeah, we have problems of leadership, we lack clear leadership or something like that. And you dig a little bit deeper, and what you start to uncover is not really that it's a leadership problem. Is more people think that leadership is the solution, and they're already jumping into solution mode and saying what we need is better leadership, because that's coming from the solution that they have traditionally seen in Web 2 for that problem. Is if a team is not working, is the fault of the leader. So if we replace the leader, then the team is going to work better, or at least that's been the narrative, and is very, very popular, although is not really true. We looked deeply into the research of Hackman, who's a Harvard professor. He spent like 30 years studying teams, and he has this thing called the leadership attribution error, which means that essentially we tend to attribute both success and failure to leaders disproportionately. So he had this example of group therapy groups where there is a facilitator that is the group therapist, and then the group of people. And it's a common practice in these groups for the facilitator to stay silent for the first 10 minutes. Like they just don't say anything. They just look at people around and they let the group to start talking. And some groups start in a really good direction and create like a really nice conversation between them. Some others start and they kind of get triggered and upset, and there is some negative feelings. And people always say that whether the conversation was good or negative feelings happen is the fault of the facilitator. But the facilitators know it has nothing to do with them. They're just always silent. And it has a lot more to do with the different groups and the personalities in them and so on, which is the whole point of starting the therapy sessions in that way. So actually the group dynamics emerge and you can start to work with it. So people were jumping to this idea of leadership a little bit because like the facilitator is the most visible part of the group, and we tend to attribute causality to it. But then the issue underneath quite often is that people still have, and because we have so many new joiners in every DAO all the time, is that they're still coming with very traditional mental models about how a DAO can operate, very centralized models that, if nothing else, because through education, we have the teacher, we have our parents, right? It's a very top-down model from the beginning. And the only real way to do this transformation is to expose people recurringly and ongoingly to different ideas, different possibilities that will start to open their mind. Like, it's not enough to give them one article or take them through one onboarding call. It's a longer ongoing process where over time they'll break down their own mental models and start to build new mental models. So having access to these different and fairly battle-tested pieces of content or insights about how organizations have been doing it differently for a very long time and have succeeded, because in DAOs we can talk a lot about case studies of DAOs and try to find best practices in DAOs, but for the most part we're still figuring it out, and a lot of the best practices right now, they're not even that good. They're just what's possible with the current state of the tooling and so on. But there is some other principles that you can point towards and say, well, this organization has been successful for 30 years with this different approach, and that way start to break down the idea that the leader is necessary. So that's kind of like one of the ways to keep up, as I was saying, is kind of these talks and these expert sessions with people who did it differently in the past, and we can learn from. The other thing that we're about to start doing is to start publishing a lot more the findings from this research, and to start building a lot more community around this research. we started working with someone who had a lot of experience building communities of practice, like 30 years experience doing this, and doing something that's called generative action research, that relies on making the research team operate in cycles and also operate openly as a community. So you go through cycles of defining a problem, kind of thinking about it, discussing it, researching a little bit, and then synthesizing that and sharing those findings. And at every iteration, you grow the group and you grow the group and you grow the group, and you do research in the open as a community. So every cycle, you're inviting more people to join, to bring new influences, new ideas, and to also participate in the research process. So we have one initiative like this at the moment that started around community health, that we're doing in partnership with Aragon. That's the first sponsor for this project. And we're looking at how do we understand community, how do we understand community health, what does that mean in Web3, because it means something very differently than, let's say, brand communities or learning communities. That's been what traditionally was studied. And we're doing this community of researchers, like open research approach. So equally, if you're interested to that, you can either join or Discord, or ping me a message, follow the RnDAO Twitter. We're sharing it across those different channels, the link. And if you reply to us or engage, you're very welcome to come and become part of that community of researchers that we're building, because that's the whole idea, to have people who are also part of different protocols, who are having different experiences, and who can also, as they learn, start to try things, run experiments, report back to the group. And that way we accelerate the learning of everyone involved. Did we lose you?
Sorry, I stepped away for a second. Can you repeat the question?
Oh, sorry. No, I thought you had dropped for a second. Just
Oh no, I'm here.
Cool.
Sorry, I stepped away.
Oh, sorry. I couldn't hear the last thing you said. I guess there was.
No, that was my stream. As I ran back into the room, I was still playing the other feed. Sorry about that. Yeah, did you have a presentation as well? I think you had some stuff.
Let me share a couple of things then. Here we go. So I wanted mostly to talk about one thing that we've been looking into a lot as we talk about the research that we are doing, and I kind of hinted at this before with the example around leadership, of how the people involved in this situation, like creating the sub-DAOs that we're interviewing, they were already diagnosing the problem. They're already in the solution space of the issue is leadership. And the most important thing we have discovered as we're running these different research projects with different clients and different partners and so on, is really going back to understanding the problem way deeper before going to building. So as you mentioned before, like the great thing about being a chef is being able to kind of cook the thing straight away and then try it and prototype and test very quickly. And that's super important. But it's also super important to not solve the wrong problem really well. And it's perhaps the hardest thing when trying to create a new product or a new solution, is being able to differentiate between these two spaces and not jumping too fast on the solution space where you're like testing and iterating and so on before you really understand the problem and everything that it carries. Because that's where we start solving for symptoms. And unfortunately, there is a lot of that happening. And the whole venture capital model, they tends to privilege people who are already in a solution, because the way they raise funding can be with a pitch deck that is talking about all the possibilities of that solution. But the VCs themselves, they might have very limited understanding of the problem space, and they're kind of hoping that the entrepreneur did their homework. But if they haven't had significant funding yet, it's going to be really hard for them to have done good research about that. And so the best entrepreneurs, they are constantly reevaluating their problem definition, not only trying to create a tool that works. And this is where like traditional innovation advice of build a minimum viable product and test your hypothesis comes from. But as you start building, the issue is that psychologically we fall in love with the solution we already have. And we had that problem even with a project that we are incubating. Is someone from our community, Ray. They started a sort of learning onboarding tool. They did last year, won the DAO Global Hackathon with the project, and then he was starting to work on that tool and had a few developers and a few other people helping him advance that project. And at first, everyone was really happy. He got a couple of DAOs to start using it and so on. But the issue that he was sensing is that in the team there was no one challenging him. No one, whenever he suggested someone, everyone was like, "Oh yeah, great idea, awesome," and there was no one saying, "Oh, but why is that important? I don't really get it. I don't think that's the right idea, or I don't think we understand the problem the same way. So maybe there is something there that we still haven't uncovered and that we have no clarity on." And then a couple of months down the line, effectively what end up discovering is that their whole understanding of the problem was a little bit shallow and they were solving for the wrong solution. So then had to go back and start again as a research initiative, like redefine the problem and then go back to the solution space. So partially what we're trying to do with partnering with the different DAO tooling projects or other people interested in building solutions, because it doesn't necessarily need to be a product, it could be a service. The important thing is a solution focused on DAOs, and that's very much the space we're creating expertise. Is that as we partner with people teams, DAOs who are doing that, is that we're trying to help them be a little bit that devil advocate in the room, where we bring back to the understanding of the problem space, and they can continue prototyping. They can be in that place and be the best they can in exploring the solution space, while we keep expanding their understanding of the problem. And the two can work in parallel instead of a linear process, which works a lot better. And then we meet regularly to share learnings across each process. So they have their product team that's operating, doing the thing they know how to do. And then we meet them and can be a little bit the devil advocate, or expand new possibilities for the way they conceive their product. That is more like the left field thinking, the expansive side, that ultimately is what can help them save the couple of months that the colleague of ours, just to give an example, was wasting going down a dead alley. So really recommend, whether any team ends up working with this sort of partner, whether you have this writer and editor who's helping you gain some perspective and work on it, or whether you're only working in your team, to try as much as possible to spend a lot of time in the problem space, because is the thing that we very systematically see DAO tooling startups avoiding, and then building solutions that are addressing symptoms rather than root causes. So that thing there. But then the other thing that we started to realize as we were going down these routes is this dynamic of, like, you have a team and they're focusing on building the product, and that's how the new DAO or the new startup, or essentially this new organization that's building a solution, starts. And then really quickly you're like, okay, I need to fundraise, and I need to figure out compensation for the team, and how is the whole thing governed, or progressive decentralization. Am I actually going that way? And if I'm not going down the progressive decentralization route, then the issue is that I'm very different from the customers, or at least I'm not necessarily really understanding how DAOs are operating, or I cannot experience those problems the same way. Like, there is less empathy with my customer base. But then if I want to go down the progressive decentralization route and be more DAO, well, is a lot of work and is yet another thing that I need to look after. And of course, there is all the other things like the team culture and the way you're doing it, like your onboarding or attracting people and hiring and managing and so on and so on. And there is just like all of these different adjacent problems that a team is trying to solve all by themselves. And when we start seeing is one of the amazing patterns that we can have in DAOs is this idea of collaboration over competition. So is there a way we can break down this problem and enable the builders to just focus on building, like enable the product team to be in that solution space, to do the fast prototyping, the iterating, the testing features and so on, that they are very well as a team, very well designed to do, very well geared to do and execute on, while then we can have some other way to support them with the other challenges, essentially offering a sort of organizational infrastructure. So instead of a startup like a new DAO tooling project starting on their own in the wild, in the ecosystem, trying to build networks, trying to figure out how they operate as a team, while at the same time trying to do the R&D and with very limited resources at the early stages, as we were saying, because who can afford a multidisciplinary R&D lab or team of researchers from the early stages? Like at best, if you have a couple of people, that's going to be great. And you kind of need those two people to think very much alike, so they gel and they feel they want to start a project together and so on. So it's not necessarily a space where you're going to have huge diversity of perspectives and be able to go really deep and find those juicier insights that save you so much time and so much money down the line. You're more like trying to just get by in the short term and hoping that you can do that later on. But what if we flip that equation, and instead of these teams trying to solve all of those problems with very limited resources, so having to cut a lot of corners from the start and then dealing with the consequences of that as they go along, what if we could actually give them a lot more support from the early stages? And that meant that instead of each project trying to do the whole thing on their own, we collaborate around it. So we're now starting to explore this incubation offer where we can partner with a team building a specific solution, again, as long as it's very DAO solution oriented. And we can offer the organizational infrastructure, because across all the research projects that we're doing on figuring out how DAOs should operate, we are dogfooding that and really applying it to have sort of best-in-class team collaboration process and DAO structure, DAO systems. And then a new project that is starting can leverage a lot of those insights and fast track their development journey. So we offer them this sort of team coaching and processes and systems and so on, so they don't have to figure it out themselves. They just leverage our infrastructure, both cultural, technological, community infrastructure, the sort of idea of community as a service or organization design as a service. And then they can focus on building on their specific project. And what we're now starting to find with that is that this model of intrapreneurship as opposed to entrepreneurship makes a lot more sense in Web3 than it even did in Web2, because the teams can really have a lot of autonomy. And also, it doesn't necessarily need to be that they're only working with us as, let's say, as a parent DAO or something that is incubating them. But we can also partner with other DAOs, like Metagame, for example. If there is a DAO tooling project that is starting to be incubated within Metagame, between Metagame and RnDAO, we can partner together, work together on making that new project as successful as possible by us also bringing the different expertise that we accumulated across the research projects and adding it to the mix. So, I mean, that's roughly the idea. That's about us. Research and development DAOs, by DAOs, for DAOs. Some of the projects that we're working on, it's a bit pitchy, so I want to leave it there too much. But if you wanna get engaged, have a chat with us, just use the QR code and hopefully see you around.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. One question. What involvement do you have with Sobol? Is it a tool you're using, or are you actually building Sobol?
It's a tool we are using, and then we partner with them for the SubDAO research project.
Okay.
The one where, the same with the other thing. So we're now exploring the possibility to build or work in a well-being analytics tool. I know you in Metagame there is also some ideas, so we also need to have that conversation and then hopefully bring it together.
Well, great. Thank you so much for your time, Daniel. Wonderful to talk to you today.